discuss this further with journalist and broadcaster Martin J, joining us live now as well. Martin, thanks for joining us here on RT. Why do you think US officials are so open in their, let's call it, special treatment of our channel?
Well, it's a sad state of affairs, isn't it, when the superpower of the world apparently preaches to the rest of the world about the state of journalism and then treats journalists rather like African dictators do. I think this blame game, or whatever you want to call it, is part of a prolonged campaign from America to, first of all, the Obama regime administration is not really dealing very well with the fact that geopolitically it's lost a great deal of ground in the Middle East, in particular Syria. But also there's a more sinister side to this, which is that the more that the Americans direct their media towards Russia, towards what's going on in Syria on the ground, and blaming them, attributing all this negative coverage whenever they can, I think that distracts the media away from much more important subjects back home, like the state of the economy, healthcare and unemployment and such forth.
Just, I don't know if you saw that report with the exchange there between Mr. Kirby and our correspondent, Guy Nair in Washington. Do you feel his response was appropriate? I mean, what do you think it was in the questions posed by our correspondent that prompted such a reaction from the spokesman?
Well, I don't think it was appropriate, and I think he may well want to consider resigning. I think that was absolutely appalling treatment of a foreign correspondent, any correspondent. But I think the greater public doesn't understand how that press theatre, if you like, is arranged in Washington, as well, I should add, it is in Brussels as well. There's a sort of a collusion between journalists, embedded or accredited journalists, if you like, and the incumbent power to go along every day and create that theatre for the cameras all around the world. Most of those journalists who turn up there wouldn't dream of ever asking a terribly important question and putting those press spokesmen on the spot, when afterwards in the daytime they have to work very closely with those individuals on gaining access to information, access to interviews. So whenever a journalist does that, breaks the house rules, if you like, then they immediately get ostracized and taught a lesson on what your journalist did, and you should be very proud of her, not for being Russian, but for doing her job. She was doing what all journalists used to do years ago, which is ask difficult questions and put institutions on the spot and not take for granted what information you're handed in this sort of spoon-feeding scenario that we have today, which unfortunately makes up a lot of what I call fake news.
Indeed, and speaking of being spoon-fed information, and I mean in that particular incident, the State Department spokesperson accused Russia of airstrikes on hospitals, and he cited the WHO obviously as a source, even though the WHO told us they're in no position to assign any blame or even actually confirm whether it was an airstrike at all. So why do you think there's this blame game that's been going on consistently now?
Well, the blame game is also part of the media collusion. I mean, we don't have any real objective reporting on the ground in Syria. That's a big problem of the dynamics of both sides of this war. There aren't really the great numbers of journalists there. So on one side, it's very easy for a powerful organization, or many organizations that make up Washington who control the press there, to make up stories and not attribute them and not endorse them and not back them up with solid evidence. And in this era that we're living in, with a crisis of media all around the world, in particular in the West, with those sort of journalists who are ready to play the game, as I mentioned earlier, to more or less write up what they're given, you can almost hardly not blame Washington for this blame game and for feeding information to the press which really does need checking out, which can't be taken for granted as being fact, but they know will be written up as more or less fact in the newspapers the following day.
All right, journalist and broadcaster Martin J, thanks for joining us here on RT today. Great to get your insight on this media scandal. Well, coming up just a bit later.